And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Bud Elliott. That's Danny Cannell. I'm Chip Patterson. You see those sirens in your feed. You know exactly what that means. We've got a date, 2025, specifically July 1, 2025, when some of the events of the last couple of days since we last spoke with you have unfolded. That is when Texas and Oklahoma, if they are applied, if their application for membership with the SEC is approved, and if they are invited to join, then July 1, 2025 is the date. Now, will that be the date? That is one of our big topics for today. And if it's not, how do we get there? Just to review the big newsy items. So on Monday, Texas and Oklahoma officially notified the Big 12 of its intentions not to renew the agreement, which ends in the summer of 2025, for those counting, more football seasons, a Big 12 life for Texas and Oklahoma if they play this all the way out. On Tuesday, they officially apply for SEC membership. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey's like, oh, us? Oh, man, I wouldn't believe Texas and Oklahoma would ever want to come hang out with us. What a surprise. And now we move forward now with that July 1, 2025 date. So, Bud, Danny, the first thing I want to know is, how awkward do you think it's going to be in 2021 and every other season that gets played with Texas and Oklahoma as Big 12 members against in-state opponents, against longtime rivalry opponents? I mean, is this so much disruption that Mike Gundy might actually win Bedlam? Like, is that the narrative and the circumstance that comes into play for Oklahoma State to win this thing? What is life going to be like for the Big 12 here in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years?
I mean,
what do you think, Bud?
we got Danny's mic's off.
Oh,
like
mic's off?
Yeah, like we got major volume issues with it. It's almost like your mic's not selected.
Give me a whole bunch of gain, as much as you got.
Yeah, like even in yesterday's, it was pretty low.
Now?
Like Danny maxed it out, like as loud as you can get it, because like yesterday's, it was still like.
It might be a button issue because I'm maxed out. Is that any better? Check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3.
Now it's starting to come in. Yeah.
Back a little bit.
Check 1, 2, 3. Pull back.
Pull back.
Hello.
Yeah. Somewhere around there. That's close.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Probably should have checked that before we started. My bad.
All right. We can just pick up. What do we think the next couple of years are going to be like?
I mean, probably not real cordial, right? All the other ADs feel like they got blindsided by this. Jamie Pollard made the comment that like they're very committed to staying in the Big 12. They can keep getting those checks basically until they can figure out, what they can do with the landscape. But unless you think like the Big 12 is going to have some sort of conspiracy where the refs screw Oklahoma, or I don't know. I have a hard time thinking it's going to be that big of a deal for their remaining life in the Big 12, which Danny may disagree. Chip may disagree. I don't think you're going to be in there that long.
Maryland caught some heat as it was making its farewell tour through the ACC. I'm just, that I was thinking about like college
that was
football.
Maryland. That was Maryland. Like, What are you going to do? Are you going to go whoop Oklahoma? Are you going to go like maybe Texas, maybe Sark's first year? Maybe you see an opportunity if somebody's up at Iowa State, if they're beating them, maybe they score a touchdown late that's extra. But like, what are you really going to do? You can get mad all you want. You can try to whoop them. Good luck with that scenario. And if they do, I'm sure they would, if they had the opportunity, they would rub it in. But aside from that, like, what are you going to do? Other than be mad because
they're so good that it's
right.
Like whatever you're going to say is only going to add insult to injury, because you're going to talk trash during the week, during the media availabilities. There's going to be like some player who tells the reporters, calls them quitters, right?
Yep.
Like, and then we'll spin that forward and we'll jump on that. And then all of a sudden, by the time the game's over, the claim is Texas and Oklahoma will have let that speak for them.
Yeah. And if like, I could totally envision a scenario if Oklahoma State won Bedlam, that Gundy would say something snarky, yes. Or I don't know. I would, but I don't think Gary Patterson would hold back if TCU has some, big win over Texas or a monster upset over Oklahoma. I think he would say something like, I think it'll provide a lot of fodder for us. Cause I think there'll be some coaches they're really quiet right now because they haven't had a microphone in front of their face. But if they get the best of one of these two teams, probably realistically it'll be Texas in this circumstance, then they'll take some parting shots along the way. But other than that,
oh, there's no doubt about it. Yeah. Especially because they know that Oklahoma and Texas are not likely to be there very long, and they will not run it up on them the next time they get the chance.
Okay, so let's move it to there. What is the path for this thing to get moved along? So they would owe a ton of money. They would basically just have to buy their way out of the contract. All the money from the remaining years on the deal, they would have to pay that into the Big 12. Well, there is a report from Chip Brown, Horns 247, who's, always dialed in and able to give reports and insight. And he reported this on Tuesday, and I think it's hilarious. A source close to the situation said the buyout money for Texas and Oklahoma to leave the Big 12 before 2025 could come from the roughly $160 million that Texas is still owed by ESPN for the final 10 years of the 20-year, $300 million contract for the Longhorn Network. So Texas could cash in the Longhorn Network and pick up the tab for everyone to be able to pack up and go. That is the most baller thing I've heard in realignment to this point. It's my second wave that I've covered professionally. In 2004, I was not yet covering college football, but in my two waves of conference realignment, that's a pretty big time move by the Longhorns right there.
I will let's do a show bet. See if anyone wants to take this. Texas is playing in the SEC in 2022. Even odds.
If
I
we
think
said
they're there
odds,
next year. Even
I'll
odds.
take it. I'll
right.
say they are.
Well, you say they are. I want that they are. I want somebody to disagree.
Okay, you're saying that all of this is able to get settled in time for this move to happen July 1, 2022.
Yeah.
I agree.
And is that just like betting, or is that inside information? Like, at least you got to at least give me a little bit more, because I will say it's definitely not going to be 2025, but I just don't trust the way that things move, though things have moved very quickly this summer. I was just guessing that there would be some hang up somewhere along the way that pushes this back to 2023 or 2024.
Look, it very well could. I just think that it's more likely that they're there next year than not. And that's, why I think I'd make the bet on it. You mentioned the Longhorn Network buyout. Now, what a tremendous investment for ESPN that looked like a terrible investment for a long time. But ultimately, they ended up building the Longhorn Network, which is, kind of pennies compared to what it could have cost to, have to buy the rights for all these other teams in the league. And then you get to move that team to the league that you really want to invest in itself. I could see a situation where maybe the playoff doesn't start until 23 and maybe they wait until 23, but I think 22 is actually fairly likely. We also could have a situation where maybe one or two of these Big 12 teams decides to leave the Big 12. Maybe they go to the AAC or to the Pac-12 or whomever. Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff. Is that the pronunciation we're going to go with? Kliavkoff. Yeah. Okay, that's going to take a minute. Kliavkoff said that they're really in no rush to expand, kind of like the comments that Phillips made. They're fine with where they are at 12, depending on if you believe that. I just think there's a good chance this is done by next year.
I think Oklahoma State and Texas Tech still have the digits from 2010. And if we're making like bar bets, I'm not reporting anything, but I think that's where I'm looking next, is who's going to get selfish from the remaining 8 schools from the Big 12, make it, you just got sideswiped here. Like, if you just got to take care of you and yourself and your school, I totally understand it. I think Texas Tech and Oklahoma State to the Pac-12 would be, then you drop it to 6. And now what are we even talking about in terms of a Big 12 from there?
It's interesting you bring that up, because yesterday I wrote for 24/7 Sports headline, without Texas and Oklahoma, the Big 12 recruits at a group of 5 level. So check this out, right? If you look at just 4- and 5-star prospects, which are basically the blue chip guys, the guys that you want to compete with in the playoff, last 5 classes, Texas, Oklahoma, 144. The other 8 teams combined, 65. Now, look, that is still a good bit more than the AAC. The AAC in that span has signed just 10. So there's still, much higher than what the AAC does. I think it does beg the question, will they remain that high if they were to stick together as 8 without the cachet of Texas and Oklahoma in the league? But let's compare those 8 remaining teams, how they do recruiting the best prospects, to, let's just say, the top 8 schools from the Pac-12. Pac-12 has brought in 270 over that time. So,
and it was 60 some for the Big 12, 144 correct. For Texas and Oklahoma.
144 Texas and Oklahoma, 65 for the Big 12. So without Texas and Oklahoma, the Pac-12, their best 8 schools, to keep the number of schools the same, they still crush these remaining Big 12 schools, who in turn also out-recruit the AAC, to be fair. But the Big 12 is much closer to an AAC level conference with only 8 teams than it is to being a Power 5 conference.
What do you think's next for those Big 12 schools, Danny?
I was just getting ready to ask you guys, like, if you're either one of the remaining conferences, who's the first team you're calling? Who is the most attractive from the Big 12 leftovers, the 8? I think it's Oklahoma State. Don't you? I mean, I know that might bother some Iowa State fans because they're a program on the rise. But I
think we thinking football only, or like
no? I was thinking basketball. What they're doing basketball wise, and women's softball, they just had a great year. Like, I think collectively as a whole, I think it's and I think now too, and what we're learning is that TV markets don't matter. Now it's about brands. And Oklahoma State, not that long ago, was 3rd in the country and barely got made the BCS national championship game. They've been a little bit better, but then so was Baylor and TCU. They were the first year of the playoff. They were both kind of hosed that first year. But I still think as far as branding, I think Oklahoma State's probably the first school you would call. Now, West Virginia might feel like, hey, what about us, ACC? But I feel like I think Oklahoma State and West Virginia would probably be the first 2 calls.
It'd be interesting as far as from the Big 12. I would look at TCU because you get the major media market. You do get a pretty, engaged fan base, which has been growing. I will say, Danny, like I think, to some fans, those sports matter, but if you're making a realignment decision based on anything but football, I think you're going to like the schools in your league are going to vote to remove you personally, because basketball doesn't really matter compared to football. It just doesn't.
But at the university president level, like, brand can mean more than just football performance and football recruiting.
100%. Also, for a very select few schools, hoops can matter, right? Like, we would laugh at the idea of Kansas to the Big Ten, and it's not going to happen. I'll put money on that for sure. But the only way people would even bother suggesting that is because of how good Kansas is
as a university
at basketball. Well, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, athletically, the Olympic sports, I don't think they matter at all. In fact, I think we're going the exact opposite direction. Phillips' comments from the ACC talked about how they have to be football focused. Clyde, the new guy for the Pac-12, I already screwed his name up. He talked about how they absolutely have to be football focused, and he's not going to go out there and say, "Hey, all these directors' cups we win and stuff don't matter." But for making money, they don't matter. People don't go to those games. They don't watch those sports. Not in numbers enough to support the scholarships and to pay for them. It's got to be football first.
And Mike Gundy did tell us Oklahoma State football is a big time employer in the state of Oklahoma, because when he was arguing for the Cowboys to get back reopened and get back to work, it was because he was pointing to the infrastructure, the large investments that have been made, and the way the community relies on that. So I think Oklahoma State is your answer. I wanted to plug this as a good company, man. We have a mathematical formula. Basically, it is taking the Director's Cup, but Bud, you'd like it's a re-weighted formula where that doesn't treat every sport the same, and it only takes 5 sports into consideration: football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and 2 wild cards. Oklahoma State finished 4th for the 2020-2021 academic year in the CBS Sports Best of College Sports rankings. Alabama 1, Oklahoma 2, Iowa 3, Oklahoma State 4, Texas 5. So good year for
outstanding year. Now, the other angle to this, and who knows what direction we go, but would you be shocked? I mean, we're already getting towards professionalism, like we're getting towards minor league NFL, minor league NBA, that if those two sports are just separate and maybe they are paid, like, so if that's the case, then who cares about any other sport than football and basketball? Like
I think you separate just the one.
Right. And it might be just the one. I really feel that what we're going to see developing is a minor league baseball setup that's very similar, where the SEC or whatever super conference is developed is AAA. Whatever, the Big Ten can salvage, ACC, maybe whatever else is AA. And then you've got the leftovers in the Big 12, the group of 5 teams are single A. And whatever they call them, it's going to be very similar. It's going to be a minor league system, and very similar to minor league. If you play great in single A, you bump up to AA. That's the transfer policy. That's free agency. Like, I just feel like that's what we're developing into.
I don't think we'll have governance or an actual structure. I think that might be like a wink, wink, nod, nod. Like everyone understands that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And that's like more separation than our existing Power 5 group of 5. It would be like, we've got separation within, so that there's kind of understood quadrants or understood levels, like you said, with the minor league baseball. But I think
what's going to be
all try to stay close together under some umbrella.
Well, what's going to be interesting is if the Big Ten, ACC, Pac-12 can stay neck and neck with the SEC super conference. Like, I almost feel like now we have to call the SEC a super conference. Like, it is better with Oklahoma and Texas than anybody. It's not even close. So can the other teams stay there? But to your point, like, at least we're going to be honest about it now, instead of treating the group of 5 like, hey, you guys have a chance at the playoff. I think what we're going to get to is a place where we're more honest with the fans and with the money and with the opportunity to make the playoff.
So the group of 5 agrees to be in the college football playoff, understanding the system is not advantageous for it, but it's because they want to still be a part of the system and they want to be able to benefit financially from it rather than try to form their own group of 5 championship. Like, that's the trade-off. We understand Cincinnati's going to get screwed, but we're still at least in this thing. And there is some financial gain from being able to still capitalize off of Alabama and Ohio State playing in a national championship game. I think that is the same decision that the ACC and the Pac-12 make, where they're like, we understand that we are entering into a competition with schools that double and triple our investment in college football. And that is unfair. Like, that is not playing by the same rules, but we are still willing to do it because we want to be a part. Like, it's almost a prestige play, if that makes sense.
Do you think ESPN, like, what level of school do you think ESPN will be cool with letting, like, if ESPN ended up being the only bidder on this? And I don't think eventually that it will, right? We have Google and Amazon and Fox and our own company, CBS, all hanging out there, all with money to spend. CBS is losing the SEC rights in a couple of years. Hell, maybe sooner, right? What if ESPN came to CBS and said, hey, we'd like to go ahead and buy you out of those remaining rights to pair with our new toys in Texas and Oklahoma? Okay. What if CBS wants to put somebody on Paramount Plus or NBC on Peacock or something like that? Like, there may be other super leagues which emerge to compete with this. But let's just say hypothetically the ESPN would be the only one and they want to develop just one super league. Like, where's your line of delineation that they would be cool leaving off? Like, I talked about this on Nolecast. Like, guys, if I was Wake Forest, I'd be worried. I just really don't see a future where Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina and Miami, like those level schools, are just left out of the future of whatever the top division of college football is. And I guess something else goes into this. Like, if you're ESPN, are you willing to pay for South Carolina and Vandy and Mississippi State and those schools to remain and pay them the same share? Like, how long does that last?
Super League. I'm not buying into the Super League.
Okay.
I think it's more of the, like, we know it is the SEC's a Super League, but no, everybody's in this together. I mean, they're not going to kill off the ACC network. Like, we're not going to start chopping off.
God, no, it's a great deal for ESPN.
Like, we're not going to start too much disruption. Like there might be a future for the Longhorn Network that's different, but I think the separation will be in investment and how much money you spend on football. And that gap is only going to widen, but we're still going to keep everyone playing for the same college football playoff. So there will be a super league. It will be the NFL junior, and they'll have their own conference rules. Because remember, the NCAA, as it's losing power, transfers that power to the conferences. Every conference gets to make its own rules. Who knows what the SEC, this new super conference, decides it wants to do about name, image, and likeness, or about the transfer portal. So I think that everyone stays together and we don't hit a 32 team super league. But if the SEC wants to mess around and, take a couple more, Pac-12 and the idea of survival says we'll take on 4 more, we could get big conference numbers, but I don't think it's going to be a total separation. I think anything else will just be the Big 12 dissolving into the American Athletic Conference.
Do you think this moves happens right now if we didn't have COVID?
No.
Last year? I don't either. I think that really set apart the schools as far as I think there was more of a collective. Hey, we're in the college football playoff. We're a part of the Power Five. And then when you saw the issues crop up, when Greg Sankey and the SEC say we're moving full steam ahead, and then Kevin Warren says, nope, not us. And, there were a lot of articles written, there were opinions that were given, and I'm sure some things were said behind closed doors. We care more about our players. You don't care about your players. And a lot of that sparked this move in everything, in every way. When the NCAA is sitting there and they're helpless and everybody starts realizing, oh, they can't enforce anything, they can't have any COVID policy because no one has to recognize it. I just think that I think that sparked a lot of this. And there always has been a contentious relationship between the Big Ten and the SEC. I think that only exacerbated it. And it was a big reason of why we're here today.
So I think I agree with you. And the detail from the reporting on this that has me feeling confident is that the initial notion of this was dated to be December or January. You had just finished all of the headaches and the ups and the downs of trying to get through that season. And I think that,
and you had a team
that had to play a factor.
And you had a team get access to the playoffs who played almost half of the games that your teams did. For real, like that again goes to your timing. It probably was right around then. And if I'm Greg Sankey and you put your neck out there and said, we're going to take on this risk. We've talked to our medical personnel and you did it on your own.
10-game season, national champion, like SEC was a winner. And there was some negative headlines along the way. I'm not going to ignore those, but
right.
I agree.
All right. One little thing before we go, because I do got to jump. Have you guys seen any word from the playoff on whether they will count forfeits? Like if the conference rule says, hey, you have to forfeit this game because, you guys had too much COVID. Is the playoff going to count that as a forfeit? I haven't seen anything from them yet. And what if different conferences have different rules and one conference says it's a forfeit and another conference says it's a cancellation?
Well, the good news is I have not. Danny,
I haven't either. But I was thinking about for some of these season win totals and stuff, because there's some contenders out there that have not announced that they're over the vax limit. And
I don't think they will. I think they're clever enough where they realize the can of worms that could open because of exactly what we're talking about. Because maybe it would, if we go where I'm just looking at news coming up about mask mandates potentially back. And if this gets worse again, you could have the exact same scenario unfold where a Big Ten is much stricter and harsher on their rules than an SEC. And I think the playoff, they're looking at this thinking, let's just wait. We can figure this out down the road. We can use the same criteria as always, and we'll figure it out. And we'll come up with the 4 best teams as always. I don't think they want to open that can of worms at all. They're going to let the conferences deal with it, and then they'll pick the 4 best teams because
who cares?
Exactly. Who cares? If Bama plays 4 games, they're going to be in. If Ohio State plays 12 games, they're probably going to be like, it doesn't matter at the end. They want that flexibility to be able to choose whoever they want to choose.
I tend to agree.
They come and they say, we don't have to talk to y'all until October 20, whatever. Yes. Y'all figure it out. Then we'll come in and let you know how we're rating this.
So what about here's another one for you. Last year, Oregon did not win the Pac-12 North. It got into the Pac-12 title game because Washington got COVID DQ'd. What if that happened? Like we could say we'll leave it up to the conferences and then we'll pick, but there could be situations where a conference says, no, this team's not eligible for our conference title game because of the forfeits that they had. I mean, there's a huge can of worms here. I'm gonna be very interested in this policy. Also, like we're doing the season win total episodes. Do we know? We probably need to look this up and talk about it on the next show. How are they trading forfeits?
Like the books?
Yeah.
I
guarantee you different ones have different policies.
I've seen so far that the notion officially that a forfeit is a loss. And that if you happen to have some VAX information on a certain team, which makes you think that they've got at least one forfeit, then you got to take that into consideration the same way that you might treat, we just talked about Miami quarterback Derek King. And we're like, hey, this guy's got injury history. He says he's going to be good, but am I going to be betting on that? So you got to take that into consideration, just like it would be some injury issues. All right.
Do they count the opposite side of a forfeit as a win?
Has to.
Okay.
Right? No, yeah, you've got to incentivize being healthy and showing up on time and having
the numbers. Books. If books count the other side as a loss, you almost have to count the other side as a win. Otherwise, you could just blindly bet all the unders and come out ahead.
Right. I think the leagues will call them wins and the books will follow suit because that's what the standings say.
Okay.
That's my prediction, but who knows? You can follow him on Twitter at BudElliott3. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. We will be back with the ACC Atlantic Division win totals tomorrow. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
See ya.